Welcome back to Hope for the Caregiver with Peter Rosenberger. This is the nation's #1 show for you as a family caregiver. That is my wife, Gracie, singing with Johnny Erickson Tata through it all. What a great testimony of those two women who have faced such brutal challenges in their life. And even now, as Gracie is dealing with the coronavirus, and she still has the same message through it all. About 12 years ago, I was watching a presidential debate for the Republican nomination for the primary. And they went through and they asked different questions. And at the beginning of one particular candidate, they asked this question: why do you think you're qualified to seek this office? Now, this guy was a 2-term governor. And I thought that was kind of interesting. They asked him that question where they didn't ask other people who had far less experience that question, but they asked him. But his answer is what just absolutely floored me. And he started off with, as a pastor, I had a front row seat to virtually every social dynamic out there. Well, I'm a pastor's son, and I immediately perked up, and I heard that, and it was Governor Mike Huckabee. And I thought that was the most extraordinary answer because governors, have this vast amount of experience running a state, but he went to that place of knowing as a pastor, you're really, elbows deep into the lives of people from unemployment to healthcare to all kinds of, just name it, crime, everything. I know because my dad got the calls. And I had an opportunity to go on his show, and we talked a little bit backstage about that. And I have been begging him to come on the show. And guess what? He finally relented. I chased him down. I held him by the ankles, and he finally called in the show. So, Governor Huckabee, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Peter. It took a quarantine to get me where I was absolutely stable in the same place. I've been home more in the last 2 weeks than I've been home in the past 10 years. I'm not saying that as an exaggeration. It's honestly the truth. Most months prior to this, I've been traveling sometimes 26, 27 nights a month. So I wasn't avoiding you. I just was trying to find a time. Now we can do it. This is great.
I've been avoided by lots of people.
I avoid them all the time.
Well, I'm delighted to be here.
Speaking of avoiding, I want to introduce you to my sidekick here on the show, John Butler. I call him the Count of Mighty Disco, but he met you twice. Once when he was in Boys State. He's from Arkansas. And the other time as an Eagle Scout.
Yeah,
so John,
I grew up in. Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in Jonesboro.
I'm hoping your folks are okay there.
Boys State. Say what now?
I said I'm hoping everybody in your family is okay in Jonesboro after the
I got a call
from
my family today. There were some tornadoes that went through, and my grandmother lives in Mountain Home, and they had some issues like that a couple weeks ago. And I live in Nashville, and we had some issues like that a couple of weeks ago. It's been a little
yes,
bit
you did.
Yeah.
Well, and you're down in Destin. I'm in. Gracie and I were married in Destin, and that's home for her. She was Miss Fort Walton Beach High School, and now we live in Montana. So we're all over the map here. But Governor, I just had Larry the Cable Guy on the show, and he brought us a few laughs, and was able to just kind of help us breathe out a little bit because the country's a little bit weird right now. Gracie and I are dealing with the coronavirus. She's got it. I've tested negative. She's got it, but she is doing well. She's hanging in there. And I just thought, don't take this the wrong way. My sister sometimes refers to you as America's grandfather. because
That's an honor. I consider it a compliment.
Well, I was going to make a bass player joke, but that was me,
Well, she means it's one because you just come along and you're able just to kind of settle everybody down. That's that pastoral experience. And not every preacher is a pastor. Every pastor is a preacher, but not every preacher is a pastor. And you really have that heart, and you took that into government and everything else. You're watching what's going on in the country. People are just anxious. They're all torqued up. And I've been trying to say, look, calm down here. Just everybody take a deep breath. Gracie and I are dealing with this thing, and she's not freaked out about it. And she, we follow instructions. But what are your thoughts on this?
Well, first of all, let me compliment you on having Larry the Cable Guy on to give people a laugh. I don't know why people think that in the midst of challenges that we ought to lose our sense of humor. A sense of humor is something God has hardwired into us. It's a part of who we were created to be able to to laugh. And in fact, the Scripture says that a merry heart doeth good like a medicine, but a bitter spirit dries up the bones. I wish we really believed that, because you'd have more Christians reaching for joke books than you would reaching for bottles of medicine every time something goes wrong in their lives. Humor releases a substance in our bodies, endorphins. They are a natural painkiller. And sometimes when people say, I just hurt all the time, I say, do you ever watch comedy shows? Do you watch something that's just drop-dead funny? And they say, no, I just don't. I'm not in the mood for it. I said, and that's when you need it the most. So I really compliment you, Peter, for helping people to take a break from the anxiety, the fear, the uncertainty, the unsettling nature of the virus, and all of the things that are happening to the economy. Pull aside and say, wait a minute, what's the very worst thing that could happen? And if the worst thing is, well, I could die from this, that's right, you could. But you could die from a lot of other things, and you're more likely to. So the fact is, if that's the worst thing that can happen to you, and it hasn't happened yet, be grateful that you're still here. You may have to fight the disease. It could, in fact, take you. But I'm one that believes that when God is finished with me, there's nothing on earth that can keep me here. And until God is finished with me, there's nothing on earth that can get rid of me sooner than he's ready for me. I just have to believe that. I think that's part of what your message is in terms of hope. We tend to look at our circumstances. I heard of a fellow, he was at church, and a fellow asked him, he said, how are you doing? He said, oh, I'm okay under the circumstances. And his friend said, well, what are you doing up under there? And that is a great reminder to me, Peter, that sometimes people live under their circumstances. That's just not a healthy way to live. I'm not saying these aren't serious times. There are people who are listening to us who have lost jobs. They're not sure how they're going to pay the rent, how to make a car payment. I do understand all of that. But worrying about it doesn't change the situation. But living with hope, looking for what I can do rather than what I can't do, that's one of the keys to coping with the challenges and the tragedies of life.
You know, I was in the hospital with Gracie the other day, and they wanted to come down and just evaluate her just to check out her oxygen levels. We live at 6,000 feet, so they wanted to make – and she was struggling a little bit to breathe, and she's had, pulmonary emboli and all these things going on. And we were down there, and we both had to mask up. And I sat there. We were in the room, and they quarantined us off. And I looked at her and said, Are you scared? She looked over at me, and she said, a little, but I've been through worse. And
beautiful.
And I thought, she really has, and she has been through worse. And we faced death many times with her.
I mean,
Well, yeah, she said 34 years of me, but that's a whole different show. But on this show, we've tried to, and then I started singing "If You Like Pina Corona," and she even had to laugh at that one. But we've tried to we've learned that we can have a merry heart in this thing. We face harsh realities. You've met Gracie. We face harsh things, but here we are, and we have found that God is more faithful than we could ever possibly imagine. As we look forward to these things of the country, I mean, I would love you just to stay with that theme. And there are people in this audience. One of the reasons I do this show is because I know the pain of what it's like to watch someone suffer and care for somebody like that. And I've done it for a long time. And so the whole point of the show is to help point people to safety. As we, as a country, grapple with these things, we've never done anything like this. We've never had to face anything, not in my lifetime. And my mother, I talked to my mother the other day, and my mother's response to everything is, how you doing, Mom? Well, I don't see too good, I don't hear too good, I don't walk too good, but I'm doing pretty good. She's really funny, but she said, I remember the polio when polio was just taking our country by storm, and how that was, and so we have faced things like this. As you look at the governors coming along, and you've been there, that position, you've been in a pulpit, you've been at a podium. What are your thoughts as the country is coalescing around this concept now of the way we're living is being changed, and we're taking a $2 trillion stimulus and all these kinds of things? What are your thoughts on that?
Peter, I think it's important that public officials, whether they're mayors, governors, presidents, it's important that they provide people with honest answers, that they give them a transparent reality check of what's going on, and they explain. People can handle even bad news, but they have to be told the truth, and that's the first thing. The second thing is they also must play the role of consoler in chief. They can't just come out in a sterile political way and say, okay, here's what's going on. Here are the new rules you're going to have to live by, and we're going to enforce them, and it's going to be tough on you, and walk away. You have to do that other very important part, and that's, bring some carrot with the stick and remind people this is a resilient and a resourceful country. Those two words to me define America. We've always been resilient. We got through a revolutionary war. We got through several other attempts to destroy us in the early days of our country. We survived a civil war that most nations never would have survived. We survived World War I, a Great Depression, World War II. We dealt with the Cold War. We dealt with 9/11. We've seen things that shook us to our roots. The assassination of a president. When I was a child, I remember so vividly when JFK was assassinated. All of these things wound us. They hurt. But what we need are leaders that step forward and say, we are hurting. There are problems. We're working on them. Here's what we're doing to deal with them. But we are people who are resilient. We bounce back because that's what happens when you have liberty. And we're resourceful. When we face a crisis, we don't give up. We get right to the laboratory and we start figuring out how to bring a fix to it. So in World War II, Detroit became the arsenal of democracy, as it was called, and they retooled the auto plants to build the war mechanism that gave us the capacity to literally save the world. Why? Because we were resilient and resourceful. So when I hear people act like this is the end of the world, no, it isn't. The end of the world happens when God says it does. Until then, it's our job to be faithful doing what he's left us here to do until he comes. And I want to just share a personal word, because I know there are people, they don't know my story. They may think, well, yeah, easy for you. You have an easy life. You're not faced with crises. When my wife and I were married in our first year, she was diagnosed with cancer of the spine. And we've been married, it'll be 46 years the end of May. But our first year of marriage was faced with the prospects that she wouldn't live. And the first report the doctors gave us was that her tumor was inoperable and it probably just wasn't going to be able to be restored. The only thing we could hope for was a peaceful ending. Then they came back and said, we can get to the tumor, but it is inside the canal of her spine. If we can get to it, she will most likely be paralyzed from the waist down because we'll have to sever her spinal cord to separate her cord from the tumor. That was the best news that we were even given. So here we are, a couple of scared kids, 20 years old, and this is what we're facing. The surgery turned out to be more successful than they thought. She had to go through radiation, learn to walk again. There were a lot of tough months of rebuilding our lives. But from that came a frame of reference so that when later we would face crises, it was always, okay, this is pretty bad. But compared to some other things, just like what you and Gracie have been through, it gives you perspective and you're able to say, we faced it before, we'll face it again. God is our strength, and we remain faithful to him.
Governor, those are just beautiful words. These are words that mean something to people that face things on a daily basis like Gracie and I do. You have been such an encouragement to me. I enjoy every time you come on. I watch you, and you're America's grandfather. I'm sorry, you just are.
As long as you don't call me America's great-grandfather, we're in good shape.
No, we won't do that. I told Shannon Bream the other night on Fox, I said, our scared hands are being held by his scarred hands.
I love that.
You have really been a source of encouragement. So thank you for coming on, and thank you for giving these words. This is such a treat for me. Governor Mike Huckabee, this is Peter Rosenberger. This is Hope for the Caregiver. HopeForTheCaregiver.com. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Have you ever struggled to trust God when lousy things happen to you? I'm Gracie Rosenberger, and in 1983, I experienced a horrific car accident leading to 80 surgeries and both legs amputated. I questioned why God allowed something so brutal to happen to me. But over time, my questions changed, and I discovered courage to trust God. That understanding, along with an appreciation for quality prosthetic limbs, led me to establish Standing with Hope. For more than a dozen years, we've been working with the government of Ghana and West Africa, equipping and training local workers to build and maintain quality prosthetic limbs for their own people. On a regular basis, we purchase and ship equipment and supplies, and with the help of inmates in a Tennessee prison, we also recycle parts from donated limbs. All of this is to point others to Christ, the source of my hope and strength. Please visit standingwithhope.com to learn more and participate in lifting others up. That's standingwithhope.com. I'm Gracie, and I am Standing with Hope.